you get this sort of alt-right pipeline that does exist within the manosphere and more broadly in society. I'd be really intrigued to hear why there is no alt-left pipeline, so to speak.
I mean, I think part of it is because, so if you look at, so I used to listen to a lot of Joe Rogan around like 2016 time, 2017, 18, I was still like a listener. I just listen to less podcasts in general now.
Yeah.
And I don't like some of the guests he's had on recently. But I mean, I think the attraction for those spaces for me and some of my friends and some of the people I met in the Manosphere even it wasn't some just like academic conehead type figure, just kind of expostulating on just these very abstract concepts. And, you know, it was a masculine guy who lifts weights, smoke weed. And it's just like, I grew up in a lower middle class, like working class background. It's a bit more relatable. It's not this very like soft guy who's like preaching that like, or not even preaching, just implying that he's somehow toxic to go and like do a bench press or something. It's like, all right, I find this person more relatable. It's like a class thing. And a lot of like progressive spaces have kind of looked down on stuff like going to the gym, even sports sometimes. Like this you can read about combat sports and left-wing people kind of tend to look down on that stuff sometimes, can look down on like weightlifting at the gym. Whereas you go to these spaces and you can kind of be yourself, and then maybe you kind of later on get drawn into a more like right-wing politics from that. It's more someone I've heard say right-wing coded. I think that's a bit of a simplistic way of viewing it, but it's a lot of self-help is like that, like up by the bootstraps. Whereas the left is more like, well, these structures are holding you back. This is why you're poor, whatever, and often that can be true. What they're saying isn't necessarily wrong, but it's not the most empowering way to look at the world yourself. So if I'm poor because the structures in society are holding me back, I think it's important to recognize that. But if I also think of it as a victim all the time, it's not necessarily going to help me to kind of get out of improve my situation. And I think a lot of those right-leaning podcasts and men's podcasts and people like Jordan Peterson, it can feel more empowering to hear someone say, yeah, you may be in this situation, but you can actually get out of it. But that also is going to be painful. And you also have to take a bit more responsibility. You can't, like, even if it is the government's fault or capitalism's fault or whatever, it is a bit more empowering. It is a bit more effective to actually say, well, what can I do about it though? And I think those spaces are better at talking in that way. Whereas the left spaces tend to talk a lot more about structures that are holding you back and why you are a victim. And I think there is that kind of dichotomy there, which, if for a lot of young men, and I was like that in particular, I don't want to hear any more about what's kind of holding me back. Like, I know about that stuff, but now I want to hear I want to be given a roadmap to kind of ascend out of that, if you like. And the right's better at doing that in some ways.
Yeah, and the thing is, though, that roadmap is to freedom, you could say. And that's something that the left values a lot. So it's always bewildering to me that it's the case that we're just stuck now with mainly right-leaning, activists that care about men and that are in the manosphere for good, so to speak. Like, it sucks. I very much have a predisposition to be suspicious of individuals like Jordan Peterson, even though I'm a big fan. But that kind of worldview as a whole, I'm very suspicious of. And there's no other option unless you want to enter a space where men are demonized a lot of the time and are villains, and it's still this 2016 thing of we're living in a patriarchy that I have no time for. It's like, why don't we have more options? It's really depressing. And I can imagine that something I saw at ARC 2023 a few years ago, Jordan Peterson's event that he puts on, they made this key analogy of how freedom isn't at the core of a good society. Freedom is a fruit of a society where the roots are responsibility. And that's a very conservative argument. But I can see that easily being deployed on the left, where actually you have to take responsibility. You have to have certain structures, even if they're self-imposed ones. And from there, then we can pursue this freedom, whatever it is. And look, I'm 20 years old. I'm not left leaning. I'm not right leaning. I don't know what the fuck's going on. I don't have a political compass that you can put me on. But I'm really sick of it. And like I've seen this the last year, I'd say it's really developed. Before that, I would have been very suspicious of someone saying what I'm saying now, that everything's going right. Like it is, especially since the American election. Do you see a way out of that where we can have more left-wing spaces that promote men's rights advocacy?
Yeah, I mean, quite a lot to unpack. I mean, first of all, I'd say like the sense of the thing with responsibility is there's different types of it. So I think, yeah, while the right will talk more about personal responsibility, and I think personal responsibility can be like a very good thing. I think that could be a left or right thing. So I think, you know, you live in a society, you should take responsibility for, you know, don't like of it, like a basic example, like don't throw your litter on the floor because like you live in a society, take responsibility for it, clean up your mess, like live your life in a way that, you know, is your community better for you living it or not, you know, like help to kind of like do like volunteering and things like that. That's kind of taking personal responsibility for your environment. But I also think the right can be bad at personal responsibility in terms of holding corporations accountable, holding corporations responsible for, say, they pollute the environment. Or in Britain at the moment, we have like Thames Water pumping like raw sewage into the rivers, whilst also paying out millions in dividends to shareholders and asking for bailouts from the government, from private capital and stuff. Like there's no sense of personal responsibility in some of those corporations, and you don't really hear the right talking about that as much. So I wouldn't say that the right necessarily has ownership of that area, but I'd say it's better at communicating to people that in the language of meritocracy, even though I don't think we live in a meritocracy, not a genuine meritocracy. I think there are lots of kind of barriers that hold people back that aren't based on kind of effort or ability. I think it talks in that language much more effectively than the left. So someone like Jordan Peterson, who I do think has a lot of negative views around socially conservative views around women, which I would say could be quite harmful to women.
Like what?
So, for example, he has agitated against no-fault divorce. So no-fault divorce is a fairly recent policy change that came in at the end of the last century, towards the end of the last century, so women can divorce their husbands without necessarily needing to show that there's been infidelity or something. It could just be an abusive relationship. That's a fairly recent thing. He's equated the abortion with the mass murder of children, which I think is I don't think it's a very scientific way of putting it. I would disagree with that. I think women's bodily autonomy is important. You could be against abortion, but I don't think it should be framed like that. I think that's quite harmful. He's advocated, he's pushed conspiracy theories about the COVID-19 vaccines. So that's kind of one area where I think he's pushing kind of views that are quite harmful. But he also talks, when he talks about young men, he can talk in a very compelling way about meritocracy and that, you know, being a man, it doesn't feel like you've won the lottery just because you've been born a man. I think that's a very compelling message for a lot of people. And he also talks about how the path of least resistance is not always the most beneficial for you. So, you know, turn the porn off, make your bed, stand up straight, put yourself out there, go to the gym, whatever. And, you know, those things can be sort of painful when you start to do them, or it's harder than just kind of sitting there, you know, watching your TV playing computer games or something. And it can be painful, but then it feels amazing after when you do that, when you challenge yourself. I think that's a really important message, that there's a gap in the culture where it's all about instant gratification. It's all about kind of what feels good. Whereas Peterson's appeal and why I think he blew up was he was kind of this countercultural figure who was coming in and saying, actually, this will hurt, but it's good for you. And sometimes you should do things that hurt because they're good for you. And it's almost like a revolutionary message that we've kind of forgotten. So despite my differences with some of his politics and the way he's gone in recent years, that message, I completely see why young men are attracted to that.
It resonated with me. I went to ARC when I was still producing the Trigonometry podcast, and I was 18 at the time. Straight away after that, I spent all my money moving to London to produce the podcast and took responsibility, went on the adventure of my life, and I was incredibly inspired by Peterson, and the way he kind of turns this life away from the nihilism and towards adventure and this magical sense. So I don't know if you'd call him a prophet in that sense. Prophet's the wrong word. He's a great orator, and he's kind of this, the same as a shaman that you'd see, kind of like just showing the magic of the world.